Okay, so we're going to pick up on page 45. This is video 2 of part 2 of the general prologue. So page 45 at the top, we're going to start with the miller. The miller was a stout fellow indeed. He was huge, brawny, and large-boned too. This was well proved, for wherever he came, he always won the ram at wrestling matches. He was short-shouldered and broad, a thick-set knave. There was no door that he could not heave from its hinges or break at a run with his head. Remember, all of these examples that Chaucer's giving us, like he couldn't pull, there's every door he came across he could pull off its hinges, or he could bust through doors with his head. It's because he's seen him do all of these things. His beard was as red as a sow or a fox, and as broad as a spade as well. Right on top of his nose he had a wart, and on it stood a tuft of hairs, red as the bristles of a sow's ears. His nostrils were black and wide. He bore a sword and buckler by his side. His mouth was as wide as a great furnace. He was a chatterer and a teller of tavern tales, mostly about sin and ribaldry. Ribaldry being indecent acts or low, vulgar acts. He knew well how to steal corn and charge threefold. And yet he had a thumb of gold, all right. He wore a white coat and a blue hood. He could blow and play a bagpipe well, and to its tune he brought us out of town. So this is a big, brawny, stout guy. He could out-wrestle any man, including farm animals, a ram. He is short-shouldered and broad. He has a red beard, a wart on his nose, with hair that protrudes, which makes him look fearful. He plays the bagpipes as the group is leaving London. The problem is that he steals and then resells the product he steals and makes money off of it. He has a gold thumb, which means that he's good at making money at other people's expense. Chaucer calls the miller a wrangler and a buffoon. He does not have a high opinion of him. The miller is the guy who ends up telling a really dirty joke about a carpenter named John, and he basically represents a modern-day bully. He thinks he's more powerful than he really is, because he's so much bigger than some of the other pilgrims. There was a great manciple of the inner temple, from whom buyers might take an example of how to be wise in purchasing food supplies. For whether he paid or bought on account, he was always so careful in his buying that he was always ahead and prosperous. Now, isn't it a fair example of God's favor that such an ignorant man's wit can surpass the wisdom of a heap of learned men? He had more than 30 masters who were cunning experts in the law, and of whom there were a dozen in that house, worthy to be stewards of the income and land of any lord in England, to help him live on his own wealth honorably and without debt, unless he were out of his wits, or to live as economically as he might wish. Men who could help a whole country in any case that might come up. And yet, this Manciple got the best of them all. So this Manciple is the one who's kind of cheating the well-educated lawyers by putting aside or kind of taking a little extra for himself. He is the clerk at what's called the Inner Temple, which is a church in London. He was actually a steward for a law school, or a dorm full of lawyers in London. He buys food and provisions for 30 lawyers. So he's responsible for actually feeding and taking care of this house full of lawyers. He's very smart and intelligent. Although he's uneducated, he saves a lot of money on his purchases. But he's not really ranked high in society because he's not formally educated. Chaucer respects and admires the Manciple. He says that the lawyers he works for could actually learn a lot from him. And these lawyers that he does work for represent the most powerful aristocrats in England. And they save them money, but the Manciple is better with money than these lawyers are. He wears a baggy blue robe, which is red on the inside, red tights, and a red hat. He rides a light brown horse and has some facial hair as well. The reeve was a slender, choleric man. His beard was shaved as close as could be. His hair was shorn around his ears. The top of his head was clipped like a priest's in front. His legs were very long and lean like a staff. No calf was visible. He knew very well how to watch over a granary and a bin. No auditor could catch him short. He could calculate, according to droughts and rains, what the yield of his seed and grain should be. His lord's sheep, his cattle, his dairy, his pigs, his horses, his stores, and his poultry were wholly in this reeve's power. And under his contract he had given his reckoning since his lord was 20 years old. No man could find him to be arrears. There was no bailiff or shepherd or other laborer whose tricks and plots were unknown to him. They were scared to death of him. His home was a pleasant one in a meadow. His place was shaded with green trees. He was a better buyer than his lord. He had privately laid by considerable riches. He knew how to please his lord well, underhandedly, giving and lending him the lord's own goods, and got thanks and a coat and hood besides. In youth he had learned a good trade. He was a good craftsman, a carpenter. He sat on a very good farm horse, a dapple gray, called Scott. He wore a long blue outer coat, and he carried a rusty blade by his side. This reeve I am telling you about came from Norfolk, near a town which is called Baldwell. His coat was tucked up around him like a friar's, and he always rode last in our company. So his role or rank, he's the manager of a large estate. He's shrewd, he's businesslike, he's very capable. He's actually, though, cheating his lords out of money by lending them their own goods. So this is an example. He tells the lords, you really need this type of this piece of equipment to do this job, but you don't have one. But I know somewhere we can find it. And the lord says, okay, how much will it cost? It will cost $400. And then in reality, the lord actually has a piece of equipment on land. So that's how he's making his money. He once was a carpenter, and he feels the need for revenge on the miller by telling a dirty story about a miller later on. He solely cares about money and status. He doesn't care about anything else. He is violent, though, in his temperament, and he violates laws regarding monetary embezzlement. Basically, he blackmails people. He's skinny with a bad temper. He's old, but clean-shaven. He has short, well-groomed hair, and he rides in the back as the very last, which may make him seem as if he's suspicious and not really trusting of anyone. Chaucer has mixed emotions regarding the reeve. He's experienced in running the manor, but he doesn't really approve of his appearance or his kind of like shisty ways. And he really doesn't like the fact that he lacks morals and ethics. And he actually considers him violent. So he's had some experience with perhaps his violent behavior. A summoner was with us there, who had a fire-red face like a cherub in a painting. He was pimply, with narrow eyes. He was as hot and lecherous as a sparrow, with scabby black brows and a scanty beard. His face frightened little children. This is not a pretty man. There was no quicksilver, lead, or brimstone, borax, white lead, or oil of tartar, or any kind of cleansing or astringent ointment that could cure him of the white blotches or of the knobs on his cheeks. He loved garlic, onions, and leeks. He liked to drink strong wine as red as blood. Then he would talk and shout as if he were mad. And when he had drunk deep of his wine, then he would not speak a word except Latin. He knew a few terms, 2 or 3, that he had learned out of some decree, which was no wonder, for he heard it all the day long. And 2, you know that a pair can say Walt as well as the Pope. But if anyone wanted to try him further, he had exhausted his learning, and he would just keep crying, "What is the law?" He was a gentle, kindly rascal. No one could find a better fellow. For a quart of wine, he would allow a good fellow to have his concubine for a year, and would excuse him fully. He would pluck a finch in secrecy himself, and if he found a good fellow anywhere, he would teach him not to stand in awe, in such a case, of the archdeacon's curse, unless the man's soul were in his purse. For it was in his purse that he was to be punished. Purse is the archdeacon's hell, said he. But I know well that he lied indeed. Every guilty man should dread excommunication, for it will slay just as absolution saves. And beware of a writ of significant, which ends in jail. He had the young wenches of the diocese under control at his own wish, and knew their secrets, and was their sole adviser. He had set a garland on his head as big as the ones that hang from the ale stake before a drinking house. He had made himself a shield out of a cake. So he is an official of the church who summons people to actually attend church or to attend disciplinary hearings by the church. He is kind of comparable to today's ushers. He took bribes and he misled people and lied. So he is not pure of heart. Because he works in the church, he's higher in ranking than most, and he has money because of the bribes that he's taking. But he is drunk and gluttonous. He is very, very ugly. Chaucer talks about him having a fire red complexion and pimples and blotches and knobs on his face. Not only does he look bad, but he smells bad because all he eats are garlic and onions and leeks and drinks wine. And then when he gets drunk, he speaks Latin to show off. But he doesn't really speak Latin because he only knows 2 or 3 terms, and they actually make no sense. His physical appearance is actually fit for his profession since he's paid to summon sinners for a trial before a court. He is so ugly and gruesome that a summon from him itself is horrible and will actually scare little children. Chaucer ironically implies that he is good because sinners can easily bribe him. So the reader should be aware of these subtle ironic statements, which are often made in these situations that can be a paradox. With him there rode a gentle pardoner of Ronqueville. He was the summoner's friend and comrade, who had come straight from the court of Rome. Loudly he sang, "Come hither, love, to me," and the summoner accompanied him powerfully. Never did a trumpet make half so great a sound. The pardoner had hair as yellow as wax, but it hung as smoothly as a hank of flax. Wisp by wisp his locks hung down, and he had spread them over his shoulders, and they lay thinly in strands, one by one. However, for sport, he wore no hood. It was trussed up in his pack. He thought he rode all in the latest style. With his hair down, he rode bareheaded except for his cap. He had staring eyes just like a hare's. He had sewed a Veronica on his cap. His bag was in his lap before him, brimful of pardons, all come hot from Rome. He had a voice as thin as a goat's. No beard did he have, nor would ever have. His face was as smooth as if he had just shaved. I expect he was a gelding or a mare. But to speak of his craft from Berwick to Rare, there was no other such pardoner. For in his bag he had a pillowcase, which, he said, was Our Lady's veil. He said he had a piece of the sail of St. Peter, that St. Peter had when he sailed on the sea, until Jesus Christ took him. He had a cross of brass set with stones, and in a glass he had pig's bones. But with these relics, whenever he found a poor country parson, he in one day got himself more money than that parson got in 2 months. And thus, with false flattery and tricks, he made monkeys of the parsons and the people. But in the end, to do him justice, in church he was a noble ecclesiastic. He could read a lesson or history beautifully, but best of all he sang an offertory. For well he knew that when the song was sung, he must preach and smooth his tongue to win silver, as he indeed could do. Therefore he sang the more merrily and the louder. So the pardoner is a church official who has the authority from Rome to actually sell pardons. So if you were a sinner, you could purchase pardons, and if you paid enough money, you would then be pardoned by the church. Are we seeing how the church was corrupt at this time period? He is, though, a hypocrite, a phony. He's ugly but fashionable. He has a loud, high-pitched voice. He's greedy with big eyes, has yellow hair, and he's beardless. Chaucer talks about how he's either a gelding or a mare. No hood on his robe, and he wears a Veronica on his cap. He sings and preaches so as to frighten everyone into buying his pardons at a great price. One of the most corrupt of all the churchmen, because he actually sells relics to people who are looking for blessings from God, but they're fake relics. He'll have a jar of pig bones and say they're saints' bones, or he'll have a piece of cloth that's of a pillowcase and say it was St. Peter's sail. He's completely taking advantage of people that trust or believe in God. In the prologue to his tale, he actually confesses to his hypocrisy. And Chaucer implies that he's not really a man, and that he's either sexually impotent or perverted. That was the whole reference to the gelding or the mare. So he has through and through he is completely hypocritical and very